All right, this is the Super Morning Show on Joy 99.7 FM. And this morning we're having a conversation about the NPP 2024 Manifesto. We're joined on the phone by Franklin Kojo, who is founding president and CEO of Imani Africa. Very soon we'll be joined by vice chairman of the NPP's Manifesto Committee, Kojo Oppong. But first, let's start with Franklin Kojo. Franklin, good morning and thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to listening to your voice. Good morning, Winston and Raymond.
Good morning. Great, Franklin. So let's start off with your general impressions, general assessment. So this is supposed to be the bold solutions for a bold future, for a brighter future, where Dr. Bawumia says he means business. This is supposed to be the manifesto that will transform this country, with the NPP saying they've been able to restore the economy, they've turned the corner. But do you see the programs and policies as the programs and policies that will help transform this country? Are these the programs and policies needed at this time?
Well, first of all, it was good to hear, at least for the first time. Can you hear me well? I think there's a break in the line.
I can hear you. We can hear you clearly.
All right. Okay. So, first of all, it was great to hear the Vice President, now flag bearer and leader of the ruling party, acknowledging the fact that there were headstorms, great whirlwinds, which affected more or less threw them off course. I was hoping to actually hear, of course, I didn't expect that, to hear that about 60 to 70% of the economic decadence was actually due to their own fault. But anyway, let's leave that for now. I think it is important to make the point that the Vice President himself admits that, look, after going throughout the country, he realized that jobs, the cost of living, excruciating cost of living, and then roads, well, I'm sure you meant infrastructure generally, are the topmost of priorities, at the top on the priority list of everybody. So the question now you asked is, how do the interventions he proposed actually meet these needs, these critical needs? Well, I think I'll take it from the first of all from the private sector intervention. I see the need, or the should I call it the direction to create jobs as it is, and then probably embedding the private sector, which it is right now. But I don't hear specifics. I mean, it's a bit difficult to understand, for instance, with the flat tax. What level, what rate of flat tax? Flat tax is a great idea, by the way. I mean, as a libertarian, I'm happy. I'm a Supreme Makata. I'm actually happy to hear flat tax because I think it's worked in other jurisdictions. And by the way, it's not the first time it's happened in Ghana. I think I need to say that. I remember my good friend, the former finance minister who died under Kojo. There was a flat tax, yes, introduced for a business threshold were about 100,000 Ghana cedis at the time, or 10,000 Ghana cedis at the time. And I remember the genesis of that conversation, the genesis of that promise. We were in the car together when we reached that conversation and the idea. So it's not the first time. I just want to put that across. But the flat tax is a beautiful thing. And we needed to hear exactly what the percentages will look like. Because you're not now going to tell us that let's wait for details. We don't have that time. I mean, after 7 and 8 years at the helm, there should be certain specifics. Okay. So we need to know what the the percentages. And if you want to do differential taxation, because that's the way it works. For businesses, individuals, and what have you, we needed to know, especially because they predicated all this particular important promise on the back of a tax amnesty. If you don't have enough money, it's always difficult to, what should I call it, rake in revenue. I mean, we know that challenge. We are doing currently 13% instead of 14. We almost got 14. We could have gotten 15 if the PJC was still board chairman of the GRA, because I know the metrics they were using. They were not relying on the what's it called, the target the Ministry of Finance sets. They actually go beyond what the government sets. So they do it beyond the GDP. So that's the way it should be. In any case, the point I'm making is that, especially now that you are proposing a flat tax revolution, it's a beautiful thing. We should have worked the maths right now, so that we know that if it is 20%, given the numbers we have, we're going to get this. Especially when you're extending it to, for instance, spare parts dealers, that segmentation is useful. So it means we must have done the work. So we needed to hear that. The other point that also makes it interesting to read concerning the private sector intervention is the collaboration.
Well, unfortunately, we've lost Franklin Kojo. We'll try and raise Franklin Kojo again. But we're also joined on phone by a Member of Parliament for Fuasia Yerebi and Minister of Works and Housing and Vice Chairperson of the 2024 NPP Manifesto Committee, Kojo Oppong Nkrumah. Good morning, Kojo. Thank you very much for joining us.
Morning, Winston. How are you?
We're doing very well, and we're glad that you made time to join us. Please hold on for us. We'll just get thoughts from Franklin Kojo, and then we'll get back to you to know and ask the specific questions when it comes to your manifesto, because people are asking questions about clarity.
That's fine.
Do we have Franklin back on the line now? Okay. Yes, Franklin, you're making a point.
I'm sorry, the line.
Yes,
dropped.
You're making a point. Yes, go ahead.
Well, thank you. So I was making the point that the other point that gladdens my heart really has to do with the collaboration with the private sector to undertake infrastructure projects. It's a no-brainer. We should be doing that by now. I mean, the Agenda 111 should have been 70% led by the private sector, maybe 30% by the the public sector. Given the model we have right now, you see the UGMC, beautiful thing that Mahama helped complete. So it's important that we have that type of arrangement, but we need to know what the percentages are. It's not enough to say we'll do a collaboration, especially because of chronic capitalist arrangements that we have in this town. We all know what happens when government wants to say they want to outsource. There's something else he said, which I'll come to on the issue of outsourcing government work to private companies for leasing purposes. Well, someone who has studied procurement contracts, over 1,000 procurement contracts, I know perfectly how these things work. But let's not throw the baby with the bathwater. The point I'm making is that it is important to know what level, what percentage. Because we already have a PPP arrangement. There are rules and laws regarding PPP. The reason why it's not worked well is because of chronic capitalist arrangement. That has stopped most of the private sector participation projects, be it PDS, be it all those scandals you've seen, the JAPA and all those kinds of things. Those are perfect chronic capitalist creations. So we don't want to hear that. We want to know exactly how you do it transparently and all of that. Tagged on to this is the issue of procurement, which is one of the biggest problems. In fact, it's the source of grand theft and corruption in this country. Procurement. You and I, we all know that, right? Now, I think he makes a point that because he wants to fight procurement, he probably has a two-front agenda. One, to ensure that a lot of whatever is needed in the country is first procured if there's availability in the country before we move on to somewhere else. Beautiful idea. There's nothing wrong with that. What we don't want is to have political credit at the same time getting into that space and making a mess of it. Look at school feeding. We all saw those problems. The second point related to this has to do with the fact that the procurement economy, I don't think can only be solved by trying to lease government services. What we do need is a deconcentration of government, or downsizing of government heavily. The government does not actually have to do most of the stuff that they do anyway. I mean, the private sector should be encouraged, enabled through a transferring process to undertake most of the things that the public sector will undertake. Look at road tolls. There was no need to take the road tolls away, but anyway, it happened. So if the roads will be constructed, I don't see why 70% or 80% of that should not be done by private people, including you and myself. If we band together, go and put in a bid, construct road from Hawaii to Lulubi Kumasi, and then toll it maybe at 20 pesos per car or something like that. We could do all those kinds of things. And I think that's the way a center-right party like the NPP, well, they are not a center-right party these days. They are something else. They're diluted. I don't know whether sometimes they are socialist or sometimes even communist. But anyway, we expect that a center-right party would actually pay fidelity, homage to these very basic principles of what the ideals are. And I think that on the question of the private sector, he has all the markings on the wall. Exactly what is left now is how you translate that into real achievable targets. Of course, you need to give us targets. What's the percentage?
So, Franklin, just hold on the line. Just hold on the line for me, because you're talking about the how, and you've asked questions. You say, I mean, flat rate. What percentage are we looking at? You've talked about PPP. How are we looking at that? What will be involved? Fortunately, we have the Vice Chairman of the Manifesto Committee and Member of Parliament for Fwaso, the Minister of Works and Housing, Kojo Oppong Nkrumah, joining us. So, Kojo, thank you once again. Let's get straight to it. The question is how. So, we're going to do this. We're going to, collaborate with the private sector to build roads, infrastructures, which would include schools, and rather it could be, a rent, or it could be a lease. It could be, a rent to own. The question is, how do you intend to do these things? What has been the analysis that went into this? And for instance, when you say you're building a school that government could rent or lease, what are the financial arrangements? How is that a better option than government building is? These are the questions people are asking, and they want answers to, Kojo.
No, I think they are fair questions. First, let me say good morning to you, to Franklin, and to your listeners. So I reckon you are starting off on this PPP program that Dr. Bawumia has proposed as part of our manifesto. The first thing is that we've done an analysis of the fiscal framework, and we desire to cut about 3% of GDP off expenditure. This is mostly in infrastructure and in some goods and services. Because, when you look at the Ghanaian budget, the expenditure side, goods and services, item 1, you are servicing debt, you are doing statutory funds, then you are doing goods and services and capex. Out of that, we're of the view that some 3% of GDP, which amounts to about 30 billion Ghana cedis, because you are looking at a GDP of 1 trillion cedis, can be cut out and should be cut out. If we do that, it reduces our revenue requirements and our financing requirements. Remember that he's already mentioned how to tighten the financing requirements as part of the improved fiscal framework. So the first answer is that we are looking to move about 3% of GDP from the expenditure tables and move them into opportunities for the private sector. The second thing is that we have identified what kind of expenditure we are talking about, mostly infrastructure related, and then some goods and services. Now, specifically, what we seek to do is that if you take the infrastructure budget, there are things that you could, rather than put on the government expenditure, some things like roads, some things like some school expenditure, not the entire school, some school expenditure, like investment in some infrastructure, investment in things like vehicles. The listing we've done, which comes to about 3% of GDP, tells us that we can move them from being expenses on the government tables into opportunities for the private sector. So if you take today, for example, you see road construction on all the major corridors outside Accra, on the Cape Coast stretch to the west, on the Achimota stretch to the north through Nsaom, on the Tema stretch going to the east when you go past, the Tema motorway and even the Tema motorway itself. A lot of these things are being done by either grants or by actual government expenses. We want to begin to alter that and to be able to give concessions on major road networks to the private sector, for the private sector to do the design and the financing and then the collection of road tolls to pay back over a period.
Okay.
One of the lessons we learned was in Kenya, I think, where now on the new expressway, they have, through PPP financing, been able to build, expressways above some of the traditional roads in Kenya. And you pay the tolls which go to the entities that were responsible for financing it. And by doing that, they've been able to avoid using government expenditure to do this and rather have the private sector crowded in to do this and take their money over a period. What you need to do is to regulate this concession in such a way that profiteering is kept and that the charges are not so high that they become a disincentive for people to use. Take something like buses. About 700 senior high schools, when we looked at the numbers. If you are changing buses and pickups for these senior high schools, let's say every 3 or 4 years, that's a lot of money per year. Now, if you're able to crowd in the private sector, so the program is to crowd in the private sector to say that government is not going to be buying school buses anymore so that some get and some don't get and we are waiting for money to pay. No, we're going to invite private sector bids, spread it over a period, and now have the private sector supply at a go these about 700 buses or pickups to these schools. And then over a period, the government budget is used to amortize that payment in sort of a lease arrangement. So what we've done is to map out about 3% of GDP, mostly infrastructure, and then some government goods and services, where we believe that the private sector can be invited to provide it and get paid over a period. It will free up a bit more space on the government expenditure tables, which will reduce our revenue requirement in some cases, and it will also create more bankable projects for the private sector directly to do these projects as concessions and get their money. And at the same time, finally, it will help in the finance sector because they can also now have bankable projects that they can raise money with corresponding banks and finance. That's the analysis we've done.
So since you talk about 30 billion, you talk about freeing some 3% of GDP, to tell us. So over what period, for instance, and these specific periods, when you do the financial analysis, is why you think it is better for the private sector to do that and not government? Share these analyses with us.
Okay, so first, different projects have different payback periods. The payback period that you need to recoup investment made, let's say, in a bus, if you look at the useful life of a bus for a senior high school, is shorter than the payback period for a highway. Mm-hmm. So different projects have different payback periods. So through the PPP Act that has been passed already, and by the way, part of the commitment is to amend that Act because there are issues with the Act that don't make it efficient and quick for projects to be signed off and approved. Using this PPP Act, you are then able to take specific projects over their useful lives and then get the payback period structured within those periods. That's the first point. The second point is that, as I've mentioned, you are looking to do regulation of these projects. Regulation in the sense that, in terms of the pricing, the risk is if you don't price well, so that the private sector operator is not able to recoup his money. There are those that government will pay back over a period. There are those that the market will pay back over a period. So if you look at some of the goods and services in particular, the goods and services dimension, those ones, government will pay back a good chunk of it over a period. And then there are the capital expenditure items, some of which the market will pay. So if you do roads, for example, you expect road users who are paying tolls to pay over a period, like it's been done in Kenya, like the Easy Pass in America. You expect them to pay over a period. And then there are those that government will directly pay. So, for example, hostel infrastructure, dormitory infrastructure, which we are expecting as part of this 3% of GDP to get the private sector to come and participate in. Government will pay back over a period, over the useful life of that period. So if the private sector built a dormitory block for us, let's say on a particular school campus, the useful life of that building is about 30, 40 years. Government will spread the payment over a period that allows the private sector person to cash out and exit without government having to front load that entire project into 1 year budget. So, for example, if government was spending 20 million cedis on this building, and government was required to pay this 20 million cedis over a 2-year period, which was 10 million cedis each, government can now, through this PPP arrangement, pay over a 10-year period and end up paying 2 million cedis each, thereby freeing about 8 million cedis residual fiscal space in the national budget. And the private sector operator, having put his 20 million cedis in this project, of course, profit allowing, will also get his payback over this 10-year period, including his cost and his profit.
And talking about profit allowing and including his cost and profit, so over the 10-year period that you talk about, if government had done it in 2 years, 10 million, 10 million, over a 10-year period, 2 million you say, but also factoring the profits of the private person, he certainly would not take 2 million every year. He would take more.
Absolutely.
So what I want to know, so over that period, do we know, for instance, that when it comes to, say, schools, this is what we intend to do? We did the time value of money analysis and realized that it is better to do it this way instead of government front paying it. These are questions Ghanaians are asking.
And again, as I mentioned, they are legitimate questions. So, for example, the modeling we have done tells us that first, there's a cost of the project. So let's say the project is 20 million cedis today. Then there's cost of financing. And under the model we've developed, we require the private developer. It's something that is already in the PPP framework that exists today. And also in our model it exists. We require the private developer to provide full transparency on the cost of financing. So who is financing you? Is it Absa Bank, is it EcoBank, or who? So the cost of financing, in addition to this 20 million, is transparent, and then we know it. Number 3, the third layer on it is the margin. The margin in the current PPP framework, how to agree on margins is already laid out. So today, if you go to Finance Ministry and you have a PPP project, there's a formula for how to calculate margins that makes sense depending on the type of project. So what we have said is that if your cost is 20 million, we know the cost of financing, we know the margin that is allowable for the PPP project. That allows us to know the payment structure for the useful life of the project. So is it a 4-year, 5-year project for a bus? Is it a 10-year project to pay for the cost of a dormitory, after which that property then reverts to government as property? The structure already exists, and it is within this framework that our model brings us to about 3% of GDP. In fact, the initial conversations were up to about 5% of GDP. But the further, may I say, due diligence is what now brought us to the point that the lower the better. So about 3% of GDP, coming to about 30 billion Ghana cedis of projects that would otherwise be sitting in the budget, because we've received all the requests from ministries, departments, and agencies in preparing the budget. We know the part that is cut out because we can't fund, and we know what we take on that we fund that we don't succeed in releasing money for because we don't have the money. That is what brings us to this 3%. And the payment is on these 3 thresholds: the cost of financing, and then the margin analysis.
Great. So, in effect, if I get you clearly, what you're saying is that in partnering with the private sector, they would construct these projects. Government would defer payment, the full payment, spread it over a number of years, and will pay the profit margins that these private entities would agree with government over the lifespan of the period.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Franklin Kojo has asked the other question. Flat rate of what percentage?
You want me to answer now?
Yes.
Okay. So when it comes to our tax proposals, you will notice that we have also stayed away from putting some specific numbers on the table now. The reality is that we are still in a fiscal year that is ongoing. We haven't planned the 2024 budget, or we haven't announced, rather, the 2025 budget. So you don't want to throw out some numbers currently. For example, I'll give you an example. When we talk of amnesty, you notice that we deliberately don't mention the period of that amnesty because you could then having people trying to be, counterproductive and trying to work to ease the policies we are introducing. And it is because tax is a matter that people would ordinarily even want to avoid, as against those who want to evade. And so as a matter of principle, we haven't put a lot of those ones out there. But I want to explain the structure of the program. So when we say flat rate, the flat rate is operating in three areas. Number one is when it comes to duties. What Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia is proposing and is committing to is that if he is the one determining economic policy fully as President of the Republic of Ghana, import duties are going to be CD-based and on a flat rate. And this is what it means. If you are bringing in, let's say, a container of spare parts, there should be predictability for you to know that a container of spare parts, for example, is 50,000 Ghana cedis. If you're bringing in a container of, let's say, a pharmaceutical products, there should be predictability in knowing that this container of pharmaceutical products is 35,000 Ghana cedis. That is a significant shift from the current dollar-based CIF system that literally changes by the week or by the month and brings a lot of unpredictability. So the first part of our flat rate program is at the ports, CD-based and flat rate to allow predictability. That is not to say we want to turn this economy into an import economy, because you'll notice that further down in the manifesto, we explain what we call the Buy Ghana First policy, which if I have some time, I'll speak to. Number two is VAT. We concede that VAT today, based on how it is structured, is now introduced multiple cascading layers. And what Dr. Bawumia is saying is that if he is in charge, he's going to merge all of those levies that you see on the import duty card. He's going to merge them into a single levy so that there's no cascading effect. And he's also now going to allow the in and out calculation of VAT so that you can then have your VAT output deducted from the VAT input. So in addition to the duties argument, the flat rate also affects the VAT compensation. And then number three, he explains that we will want to introduce a flat rate like what is done in Estonia. So the first question is, what is done in Estonia? Estonia has a 20% flat rate for income tax. And what it does is that the amalgamated picture allows those who are earning very high not to have this cascading level that your first 1,000 is this and your second 3,000 is this and your next 2,000 is this, but to have one flat rate. I think currently what they are doing is 20%, which allows a lot of predictability from the lowest earner to the highest earner, and brings about what we believe is some more equity in the tax administration system. Now, we haven't put out the rate yet, as I mentioned, because tax is a matter that ordinarily people want to even do tax avoidance, as others also try to do tax evasion. So the rate is what we haven't put out. But the structure, I think we have explained.
Yeah, but somebody would say, if you haven't put the rate out, isn't the rate what will convince us that indeed, if you're voted into office, our lives could be better? So why don't you put the rate out? Let's have a conversation and then decide that this is a rate I want to work with, and so I buy your policy. Instead of just telling me we're going for a flat rate. And then if you come into office, you put out something that may not inure to my benefit.
It's a fair question, and let me answer that question. So when it comes to income tax, today we have an income tax rule. You will find that ordinarily, nobody is starting off by telling you that when I come, I'm going to put the income rate at this level. The conversation today is about the structure for income tax. So like the duties, like the VAT, because all along as we go through the conversations, nobody is talking about the rate of taxation for VAT or for duties or for income tax. What we are talking about is the structure we are going to use to bring ease and predictability and convenience. We are clear in our mind that if we want to reduce the cost of living, if we want to ease doing business, we don't intend to bring about a rate that will end up making you worse off. But what we are seeking to do is to relitigate the structure. And that is why, for example, the import duties part, I've explained to you, CD-based. I've also explained to you the structure. And in fact, the candidate also mentioned that he'll give you a guess. It will not be higher than Togo. though he hasn't put the rate out. And in fact, if you look at across all the conversations, because the 2025 fiscal program is yet to be put in place, nobody's put out the rate for that. If you take VAT, even when we are saying that we're going to simplify by making it a single levy and making it input and output deductible, we are not putting the rate out. And it's not just that. Nobody's doing that. Again, because you haven't done the 2025 fiscal program. If you take income tax, where we are talking about, we are saying we want to shift from the current multi-tiered income tax structure into a flat rate. And our suggestion to you, what we are saying to you, that it's not going to make you worse off. The rate is not going to make you worse off. But like other tax matters, that's why we're saying that we haven't put out the rate today, just like nobody's putting out the rate today.
Well, I'll get back to Franklin Kojo shortly, and but Kojo, you've talked about, let's look at income tax. We have a progressive, structure.
Yeah.
Now, for those who earn little, they pay, the tax is little. Mm-hmm. Those who earn more get to pay more. The belief is that those who don't earn much don't pay much, so they can, those who earn much, even if they have to pay much, it wouldn't impact them. If you go for a flat rate, wouldn't, and I mean, you've talked about the Estonian example, for purposes of analysis, let's say 20%. If we go for a 20% in Ghana, for those who don't earn much, if they have to pay that, wouldn't that hurt them?
So first, I want to be clear that we haven't said 20%. The 20% is just.
I am saying for purposes of analysis.
Yeah, I know, but I want to repeat it because these things. Sometimes somebody will go and clip something on social media and start running that we said 20%. So it's important to emphasize we haven't said 20%. We're only saying that today in Estonia they do 20%. Now, when it comes to taxation, you see, there are some conversations that we all have to rally around as a country. We are all complaining that our debt situation has gotten so high, and we need to do a debt exchange program, very painful one, very regrettable one, but one that was needed to try and clean up our books. Why? Because our revenue has not been performing as much as we desire, while there are so many expenses on the national books. If we are now trying to clean up across sectors, something has got to give. We need to find a midpoint. Now, in that midpoint, what we are saying is that there's a lot of confusion in the minds of potential taxpayers because of the progressive system we are running. In fact, if you do the analysis with the GRA and you go through the assessments they do, the number of assessments that when they are done with, they find that people are either just confused or are just, running roughshod over the system. It tells you that, A, we could actually get a lot more government revenue if we had a flat, predictable system across board. And B, if you pegged the percentage point or the price point of that flat, something not extremely high from the baseline that the average person is paying today, it will not harm the majority of our people. Between these two, that's where you peg your point.
Okay.
For us, what we are saying is that you need a structure that is simple and predictable so that the majority of people who are not participating in the tax program, they can now see clarity that, so when I earn my income, apparently all I have to pay is 13.5% to government, whether I'm a poor person or a rich person. All I have to pay is 13.5. It's simple, it's predictable, everybody has to pay. I don't now have to say that my first 1,000 I pay this, my second 2,000 I pay this percentage, third 3,000 I pay this percentage. No. It's flat, it's predictable to everybody. And if it's not too far from the baseline point, and people are not significantly adversely affected.
And from your workings, this would lead to more revenue and increase our tax to GDP rates?
One, it will broaden the tax base because we have more people coming in. Two, that coupled with the other interventions that we are rolling out. Remember, we're trying to go fully digitized on tax, etc., will contribute to an increase in our tax contribution and, yes, our tax to GDP rate. And three, more importantly, coupled with a 3% reduction, 3% of GDP reduction in expenditure, we expect that it will close the financing gap, which is one of our biggest problems in this country, and at the same time create more opportunities for the private sector.
Great. So let's get back to the conversation. Franklin Kojo is founding president and CEO of Imani Africa, and Kojo Oppong Nkrumah, member of parliament for Francois Yerebi, and vice chairperson of the Manifesto committee. Franklin, so earlier you had asked some questions. You've had a member of parliament for Francois Yerebi and vice chairperson of the Manifesto committee answering you. Questions answered. You're satisfied now?
Well, to some extent, I just find it a little bit curious, though, that even though there's not been any estimation, my good friend is able to estimate that 3% of GDP being more or less set aside for the private sector will come up to some, at least 30 billion. Is
Yes.
this a futuristic figure or based on current estimates on GDP? Because presumably the argument is that we don't know how much tax will be coming in, so we can't estimate the value for the flat tax revolution. Then it presupposes that you probably would get 3% of something bigger, probably lower than the 30 billion he's mentioned. By the way, it's curious. I find that 3% allocation to the private sector quite interesting. Did you know, if you look at historical records of how the budget deficit really is, especially when it comes to, last year budget deficit was around, was it 40 billion, I've forgotten the figure.
This
It
year,
looks to me that figure seems to be closer to exactly what the budget deficit figure really is. That's going by historical records. And again, if you say that you want to reduce withholding tax for small-scale gold exports to 1% to discourage smuggling, it presupposes that you've done some estimation to show that if you reduce withholding tax by 1%, whether to discourage smuggling or not, a significant pot of money will come to you as well. So it's important this question is answered properly, because you see, the number of taxes you want to reduce and the restructuring of the tax would presuppose that you have really done some historical accounting. And we can know these things, right? We do estimations. We know the nature of the economy right now. We know what is likely to happen the next year. So some estimation. But I can understand him. He wants to be safe rather than being held to the guillotine when they don't meet the particular figure. I thought, though, that something else I was going to make about the private sector being given the pride of place. Well, like they say, should I call it agrobus or a I noticed that the NPP is going on a rapid, should I call it road infrastructure? What do they call it? Rapid something. Where every district is supposed
Drip.
to get tractors, some equipment. And I don't know whether there's any private sector participation in it. It looks as if it's the whole state that is doing that. But anyway, these are some concerns I have. The other point I need to make quickly, though, is that I noticed that the vice president commits to how do you call that? Just 1 second, I'm pulling it from my. He commits to a 1%. He commits to a fiscal responsibility council, an independent one, which is very important, because I think without the independence of that council, we'll never have our department in that. Our fiscal issues being dealt with properly. So it's a good thing, and it will actually help do proper reviews of whatever project government wants to engage in before they actually roll out. So that's a good thing. As I said, what I'm not too sure of is the procurement aspect, which has to do with the leasing and all of that. But so these are just my fair responses for now.
Okay, let me just bring in Kojo Oppong Nkrumah again, so that he can, address these concerns. Hello, Kojo. Okay, I don't think we have Kojo Oppong Nkrumah. We'll try and see if we have him on the line. But until we get him, let's get back to Franklin Kojo. So, Franklin, let's get back to you now. I mean, you've talked initially about the PPP arrangements. You've talked about the tax arrangements, for instance. Beyond, okay, so I'm told that Kojo Oppong Nkrumah is back. Yes, Kojo, thank you once again. So, Franklin is asking, okay, Franklin is back. But do we have Kojo on? Okay, so let me continue with you, Franklin. The Vice President talks about cost of living as being one of the most important things that Ghanaians talked about. When you listen to him talking about the plans he has in, reducing the high cost of living, for instance. Are these the plans that you believe would help address the challenges?
Well, in reducing the cost of living, again, I did not really see specifics. You see, because the cost of living factor is a combination of the cost of money, which obviously businesses would have to look for. So that's, and then obviously inflation, which are clearly the markets. And of course, if you ask the exchange rates, which are the traditional, should I call them, tripod of determining the cost of living. And it's true. What I've been heard is essentially, again, inflation is this. What are we going to do to reduce inflation? I hear so many things, some sort of prioritization of local produce and all of that, exports support and all of that stuff. But these things we've heard all before. I think it's important to link these things to some estimation so that we know how are we going to, if the SME banking is coming in, at what percentage rate would they be getting loans for? And how are these loans going to be structured? Right? Because it's a combination of several things. He talks about social housing, some of the commercial housing. All these things are part of the cost of living for people. How are you going to do the permutation in such a way that even if for day shelters or monthly shelters, at what rate? That's what I'm saying, that by now, 7 years is a long time for an economic guru to have mapped out all of these things anyway. I'm not really buying the notion that we have to wait for certain. No. We just need some estimations. How much are you going to allow businesses to raise money for, knowing the general cost of money, right? Because you say you want to intervene and reduce cost of living. So how are you going to do that? What percentage? If it's a state-led, at what point? What are the various bands that people would have to borrow money for? Then, of course, the exchange rate factor. I've not heard any structural shift to addressing the exchange rate factor, which is a worry, because we all know what the lectures were about on the exchange rate. We know that. I didn't hear any clear definition. I haven't seen any clear definition even in the manifesto itself. So it's another worrying point. So just saying that we reduce the cost of living doesn't seem to cut it, because it's important that we know exactly how this seems to be rolled out. And of course, the which one? After inflation, the cost of money, exchange rate. I think I've talked about this. So it's a bit, I don't know. People may have to work. If it is a case that they're going to pay a living wage, are you committing to a living wage, a minimum wage that is probably at par with the exchange rate? Because you can still get money in an economy and will be decimated by these factors, inflation and the cost of foreign money. So I think it's important that we hear clear, measurable, because it's too much. Too many years have gone on, and we now need to hear estimates. So just merely say, "I'll do SME banking." We need to know, especially when we set up. Didn't we do yesterday? You and your colleagues on the show after the Manifesto presentation, you and Raymond and Evans, were going on and on about. Yeah, we all saw what happened to this COVID fund, and we don't know what's the story. How many people have paid back? You see, because that's also a function of the survival rates of businesses and individuals. So that's what we inform you, that if you give money to even free money, free interest-free money, this was how many people paid back. So based on this one, I am going to propose a 3%, because I realize that people are not able to pay back even when the interest are free. There's no interest. So we need to understand all these dynamics. So we really need to have proper policy conversations. And I think the Vice President's team ought to be ready, because as a supporter we have that. This time we don't have that time to waste at all.
So talking about having a proper policy conversation, Kojo, we've seen the highlights of the manifesto. Is the full document ready?
Oh yeah, the full document is also out. We published that also last night.
Okay.
But very quickly on the cost of living. So it's not just a high-level conversation of reducing the cost of living. He talked about the 4 parts of the cost of living: energy, rent, transport, and food. On energy, he was clear that we're going to have to dilute the current cost of energy by bringing on board about 2,000 megawatts of solar power. It's specific. On transport, for example, he's spoken about moving to high-capacity electronic vehicles so that the things that cause the escalation in the cost of public transport, usually fuel prices and spare parts, are contained. So move to electronic vehicles so that the fuel pass-through cost is eliminated. Also, if you are doing the CD-based flat rate import for spare parts, you are also then able to contain the spare parts side. So transport he dealt with. Food as well, he was extensive on how food inflation can be contained. On rent, he spoke about housing, and that's what I heard Franklin talking about. The line has been going on and off, so forgive me. I heard Franklin talk about social housing. Yes, he spoke about rent and the program to ensure that eventually access to housing for all is boosted so that the price point will come down. Now, on the currency, again, Franklin talk about it. It's a very important matter to people. He told an elaborate story of how the gold purchase program then came to back the gold for oil program and how he now wants to expand it to cover other forex demands so that the demand for forex is curbed. You have multinationals in this company that are sometimes looking for 100 million, 200 million to evacuate out of the country. And now, as he explained, the move is to now get them to give us the CD so that we can go through the gold purchase program to ensure that they get dollars on the other side without putting pressure on the limited forex on the market. And that's a big, bold move to curb the demand for forex on the Ghanaian market. So I think he's been specific. We are happy to have a debate on the specifics and to question them and to provide answers like we're doing this morning. But I don't think it's that these issues were, in jest. The last point, and frankly makes a point I agree with that, some of these ideas have been floated before. The difference will be in execution. For those ideas that have been floated before, the difference will be in execution. For example, when he talks about a Buy Ghana First policy, he makes the point that we're going to back it with legislation. That has never been done. So the idea, as you mentioned, you may have heard it before, but this time around, we're going to back it with legislation. And for public procurement, you have to prove that you can't find it in Ghana or you can't find a made-in-Ghana version before you are going for an external version. Because remember, the old structure of public procurement has just mostly focused on cost. We are introducing a new dimension into it that focuses on ensuring that Ghanaian products should be purchased first. And he's mentioned amendments to the Public Procurement Act
Kojo,
and to the Local Content Bill to be able to do that.
Kojo, I have a single question on illegal mining. Illegal mining is mentioned twice in the full manifesto. One, it says you want to collaborate with national security to curtail illegal mining activities ongoing along the rail corridor. The other one is also talking about addressing the negative impact of illegal mining on cocoa growing areas. Is this the new strategy to fight illegal mining?
No, there are just two elements of the new strategy. The new strategy also includes the Minerals Development Bank, also includes the geological work for identifying where gold reserves are, also includes extending support to miners, and number 4, expanding the community mining programs. And let me explain. One of the reasons for which people are doing this illegal mining, especially in water bodies, etc., is because they are looking for gold. They are looking for economic activity to get gold so that they can also make a living. Very often, they are under the guise of prospecting, doing this illegal mining. Under the entire program, 2 of the elements that you've mentioned and the other 4 that I've mentioned, government is now taking on the responsibility in the Bawumia administration to do the geological survey so that you don't have to go and explore. So this whole exploration game is going to end under the new model. Number 2, the financing required so that you do it with the right equipment and in the right way is also being provided under the Minerals Development Bank that has been mentioned in this manifesto. Number 3, logistics like the gold catcher machine, etc. And yesterday he highlighted that one, are also going to be made available to support you. And then number 4, the success of the community mining schemes. And you notice that since the community mining scheme started, places where you had a lot of illegal mining activity and a lot of confusion, which were now redirected into community mining, there's less opprobrium there. So now when you expand and you ease the processes for community mining, then you are going to get the whole combination of these things move there. In that case, now when you say that you are working with national security on this side to ensure that those who should go to the proper sites are still here, you are pushing them out of it, it's, has higher chances of succeeding in that area. So no, it's not just that tool. It's a broader program, as I've explained. These two that you've mentioned are part of this bigger program, and you find all of the other elements in the manifesto.
Okay. Thank you, Kojo. But Franklin, finally, Cape Coast Airport back again in the NPP manifesto. How feasible is it, and is it really a necessary development we must consider in the central region?
Well, I'm not too sure. I mean, air travel is fine, it's good, but within Accra and Cape Coast, really, I mean, putting up airports all over the place. It's as if we are racing to dice up this country so that we travel, should I call it, in record time, maybe through time and space. I seriously don't think this Cape Coast airport is needed at all. I think we are better off probably expanding the routes, do dual carriage, and let's have a good ride. It's not the time you need to fly. You also want to appreciate nature. Look, you pick from a plane from here to Cape Coast, probably 20 minutes, then you are there. I mean, it's not economical. It's not good use of our money, not at all.
All right. Thank you very, very much, Franklin Kojo, who is founding president and CEO of Imani Africa. Thank you also, Kojo Oppong, Nkrumah, vice chairperson of the Manifesto Committee and member of parliament for Francia Yobi. We're very grateful to you.